Good Monday morning. Welcome to the WLBB Community Voice program here on News Talk 1330, FM 106.3. This morning, streaming live online at newstalk1330.com. I'm Colin Worthington. I will introduce you to my guest here in just a second. If you paid attention to our local newscast, last Monday I told you about a Carrollton doctor who had hoped to build a molecular coronavirus testing lab on the west side of the city of Carrollton. City of Carrollton had scheduled a planning and zoning meeting for last Wednesday because they were going to review the plan and consider a rezoning change that would allow for the facility to start operating in the former George Washington Carver High School building, 302 Martin Luther King Jr. Street. But last Monday, following a number of concerns and questions about the project from some community leaders, the city did opt to postpone that hearing. Right now, it looks as though June will be the earliest that could happen now. But in postponing the hearing, city officials, they said they knew a number of residents would want to speak out and get questions answered at that hearing, but would be unable to do so, not being able to attend with the shelter-in-place orders active. The idea for the lab was belonged to Dr. Brent Harris. After that rezoning session was postponed on Monday, I asked him if he still planned to push ahead with that proposal. He was clearly having second thoughts at that time, but this morning he's the guest on the Community Voice program, and we'll check in now and see how he does feel about that. Dr. Harris, good morning. Do appreciate you.
Good morning, sir.
Appreciate you checking in with us this morning, updating us on this potential, this plan here. But let's start over again. Catch us up on the story, how you came to determine that this project is needed and would be a good idea.
Sure. So, I think so we're talking about the laboratory in Carrollton, and from a global standpoint, nationwide there's a need. In Georgia, there's a need for testing. And then locally, there's a need for testing. Specifically, just within my own clinic operations, we have the med pod set up in the parking lot to separate potential coronavirus patients from our non-sick patients. And so, and then we swab people. We send them, send the samples off. And currently, we're sending them all the way to Virginia to be tested at the network's laboratories. And so, you have to package them up, FedEx them. It takes a day to get there, and then they run them. They put them in their queue. It takes them 3 days to run, so we get resulted back in 3 or 4 days, kind of thing, which is kind of painful, especially people with the the fear and the anxiety regarding the infection. They're worried about it. From an exposure standpoint, every day that you delay. People don't treat it the same if they think they're positive versus that they know they're positive, right? It's just like anything else. When you know for certain something is going on, you tend to be a little bit more serious about it, especially the patients that don't have significant symptoms. It's one thing if they're gasping for air and they're having difficulty breathing, their oxygen sats are low. They're not going to be going anywhere anyways. They're going to go home and wait or end up in the hospital. But the people that have like a mild, runny nose and, it's just allergies, but my boss sent me up here to get swabbed because I was, sniffling in the office, those patients aren't going to take it seriously until they get the positive result. And they're like, really? Wow, I didn't realize that. And so they're going to be spreading it, more or less during that period of time between when they get tested and when they actually have a definitive result. Does that make sense? And then...
But you saw this. You saw this as an issue personally. Having to wait, and you had this property in Carrollton. How
Correct.
long had you thought about using that as a facility? Was that your initial intention when you bought that?
No, probably a year ago. There was an article in the Times Georgian in Earth Day of 2019. We discussed about after we purchased that property. I put it in the paper. At that time, we were talking about expanding our Liberty Eagle Academy over that direction for, middle and high school type stuff. But from a logistics standpoint and an operation and a school growth, it's just nowhere near requiring that at this point. I don't know if it'll ever get that big. And so from a business expansion standpoint, it just doesn't make sense for Liberty Eagle to expand off of our current campus just because our current campus is working so well for multiple levels, grade levels. And so it's been kind of sitting over there. I've been doing a little bit of work over the last, 10 months over there. And then Anna and myself, my wife, we were talking about possibly setting up something because we had heard different providers in the community. It'd be nice to have lab function here. We said, man, it'd be nice to have a lab here. It's painful to wait days to get results. And so then we started brainstorming. First, we kind of figured out, okay, can we even pull this thing off? Because it's tough to even start in general for an operation, molecular lab or just a laboratory in general. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of pieces. And there's a pretty big crunch as far as just having the supplies needed to operate one. So we started, just kind of crunching numbers and looking at the even the capability of putting it together. And we decided, oh, yeah, we could probably do it. And so then we said, okay, where we can put it. We thought about putting it over in a little office space I have, but the rooms aren't big enough. And then the ceiling, the walls don't go all the way to the roof deck. It's just not really set up for a laboratory. And we were thinking, like, hey, that old school would be perfect. We went over there and looked at it, and the classrooms are actually set up perfect because for a molecular lab, like a PCR lab, you need kind of a specimen room, then you need a pre-PCR room, and then you need a post room. And so the patient samples kind of flow through each room, and those levels of contamination per room. What you don't want to do is when you magnify that RNA into DNA from the viral sample, it magnifies as it goes from room to room, and then you kind of magnify up that signal and then read that signal if it's positive or negative. And so those individual rooms are actually set up perfect to do that process. That's how molecular labs are set up. And so there's zero modification essentially to the building for it to be fully functional. It just needs to be cleaned up and ready to go.
That facility would only receive tests. I mean, people with potentially ill, would they go there to take those tests, or you would receive them at that facility in the mail? How would they get to you?
Yeah, either we would have, like, for local clients, so like if Tanner Hospital wanted to use this, if the U.S. Med Clinic, my own clinic, we were going to use this. I mean, if other primary cares and urgent cares in the area would use this, it would be, hire somebody to do pickups for us or multiple people, pick those samples up once a day and bring them to the lab. As far if we had the capacity and say, Chicago had an outbreak and they're, right now one of the hospitals up in Chicago is 2 weeks behind on lab results. So when they swab somebody, it takes 2 weeks to get the result back. They could FedEx overnight their results their samples to us, and we could run them and maybe have them back to them in 2 or 3 days. Until we hit a capacity. From a local standpoint, I'd take care of the local community first, and then if I had additional capacity, I'd try to help those people across the country that had the longest wait time.
What would you actually need to do to that building? Would you have to change anything inside of it as far as protection for what is being brought in there? And are there state guidelines, are there national guidelines to do something like this?
Yeah, there's actually, it falls under what's called the CLIA certification. So CLIA is basically like your clinical laboratory regulations, and that falls under CMS, which is, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Mm-hmm. And there, from a safety standpoint, that stuff is highly regulated. This place is not like a research facility or anything like that. We're not proposing anything like that. This is purely a diagnostic facility. So patient samples come in and get analyzed. Under the initial, sample preparation, all that is done under a biosafety hood. And mostly a lot of the reasons for the standards and protocols is to prevent mixing up and contaminating a non-positive sample, by a positive sample. So you do it under kind of sterile conditions in a biosafety hood. You prep everything, and then that prepped sample plate comes out with multiple samples on it and goes into, we wanted to put in robotic liquid handling devices. And so those robotic liquid handling devices basically add the different components and mixtures that you need to isolate the viral RNA and then magnify that RNA into DNA and then register if it's positive or negative. And so all that's under CLIA. We've actually already, because we have an MD, PhD with molecular biology training. He's the lab director of it. CLIA has already given us the okay based on our credentials and our operation to open the lab. So we already have a certification, CLIA number to run a high complexity lab. It's considered a high complexity because there's it's a very technical type procedure to do those little tests. There's at different CLIA levels. So my regular clinic has what's called a PPM certificate, a provider performed microscopy CLIA certificate. So I can do CLIA wave tests. So that's like your flu test, your strep test. You swab somebody, you stick it in a little cartridge, and you add maybe one thing to it, and it automatically runs. There's really not a lot of moving parts to it. And then the next level up is provider performed microscopy. That's you prepping a little slide of certain things. You can only do certain things with that. You can't cut skin and look at, pathology samples, but you can, take a nasopharyngeal swab, put it on a little slide, put it under the microscope and look at it and say, oh, yeah, it's chock full of bacteria. It's not. So those are kind of low complexity certificates. Then you get into the moderate complexity certificate, and those things are in between, what my clinic can do right now and what a high complexity lab can do. The highest complexity lab, which is the certificate we have, it has very strict guidelines as far as A, who can direct the lab, B, kind of how they're set up. So, like that PCR needs multiple rooms in order to be CLIA compliant. So you have to have a sample room, a pre-PCR room, a post-PCR room to prevent contamination in between the sample preparation steps. Does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely does.
Yep. And so all that's regulated. They would be coming in and regulating or inspecting that kind of thing on a routine basis and say, okay, this is deficient, fix this. You're doing all this perfect. You need to tune up this part of your manual to show your processes. They do inspections just like they inspect, from the health department, a commercial kitchen. It's the same kind of concept where, Burger King or, the corner cafe, they get a surprise inspection every so often. And if the health inspector shows up and they got, rats and bugs running around and, they're leaving their meat on top of their veggies, they're going to shut them down.
Time right now is 8:43. Our guest is Dr. Brent Harris. He has proposed building a molecular coronavirus testing lab in the city of Carrollton, and that process is ongoing. We'll take our first break here. I do want to talk to you about some of the concerns you've received from the public, and if you've been able to answer them directly, or if we're just hopeful that maybe you'll be able to explain them better during that rezoning session, which at this point looks like it will be at least June before you get that opportunity. We'll take our first break right now. Time is 8:43. We'll come back with more Community Voice program here on News Talk 1330, FM 106.3.
At Tanner, our heroes are fighting the COVID-19 virus around the clock. But you have an important job too, and it's urgent. Stay home.
We all must work together to stop the spread of the COVID-19 virus.
Staying home is the only way to avoid exposing your loved ones to this virus.
Each time you leave your home, you risk exposing yourself and spreading the virus to others in our community and in your home.
Do your part so we can continue to do ours. Stay home.
It can save the life of someone you love.
As we journey through this global pandemic together, Oak Mountain Academy is lifting everyone in prayer and holding the community in our hearts. We continue to pray for all of the families directly impacted and the first responders and medical personnel on the front lines. There are so many individuals working around the clock to keep us safe and healthy. I'm Patrick Uran, headmaster, asking you to join all of us on the mountain in prayer and gratitude for everyone in our community. For more information about the Academy, visit us at oakmountain.us.
8:44. Welcome back to the Community Voice program, News Talk 1330 FM 106.3. Our guest this morning, Dr. Brent Harris. He's proposed opening a molecular coronavirus testing lab here in the city of Carrollton. And I probably should point out that I keep saying coronavirus testing. I believe future plans, he hopes to be able to test for other things that'll keep that facility open. Before we did go to the break, I did mention he did receive some pushback in the community or some concerns from community leaders, and they also discussed that with City Council. And I know that you, Brent, are aware of some of those concerns. You'd had actually shared some on your Facebook page. And before I let you discuss those, I do want to mention when this show is over, we're going to post it to our Facebook page. We'll take the audio package and we'll put a nice happy picture of Brent up there and put it on the News Talk 1330 Facebook page. And I do encourage you, if you have a question here that perhaps we didn't cover on this morning's program, if you post it up there, maybe we can get Brent, if he has a chance later on today, to look at those and answer those questions for you. Again, right now, Dr. Brent Harris, please, you talk about some of the concerns that you've received from the public, and were you able to answer those and make them feel better about those concerns?
Yeah, I think the initial, the main concern that kind of started it all, someone posted a video on Facebook about it being a coronavirus hospital. So, and a lot of the people that live in that area were worried, okay, it's a hospital. They're coming over here bringing a lot of sick patients. It's going to spread into the local community. It's going to, infect additional members of the local community. As a diagnostic lab, there's zero risk to the local surrounding area as far as the community specific to the COVID-19. The coronavirus, as we know, is already circulating in the community, so it's not something that we can add to. When the sample preps occur, they're all neutralized, and so they're not infectious at that time. And so there's zero risk to the surrounding area. I mean, we're going to be getting long-term, hopefully, into molecular testing, things for like STDs, gonorrhea, chlamydia, HIV, hepatitis. My wife even wants to get into possibly molecular cancer diagnostics and therapeutics. I mean, our second youngest one has a neuroblastoma cancer, and so I mean he's good right now. He's in remission, but still, that kind of thing weighs on us. The other thing that I've heard from an opposing standpoint was the rezoning fear of changing property values. Kind of this gentrification concern that we would possibly take surrounding properties through eminent domain. There's plenty of room over there from our property standpoint. We're not going to be taking or buying any additional property. There's just no need to do that. There's plenty of room over there. Those are the main ones. I think the other thing was the fear of us demolishing or tearing down the building or modifying the building. From a rezoning standpoint, it's currently zoned residential multifamily. And, prior to me purchasing it, that was the discussion with somebody who's probably going to be buying it to demolish it. And I did not think that was a good idea because the building is very nice. I mean, it's a structurally nice building. And so I'd hate to see it demolished. You really, in order to utilize the current building as it sits, without demolishing it and tearing it up, you have to rezone it because it's not conducive to a multifamily operation. There is one thing you could potentially do with it right now is it's kind of an assisted living nursing home facility. But, if the local community was worried about, increasing the density of coronavirus in their community, everybody knows that nursing homes and assisted living homes are kind of coronavirus hotbeds. And that just has to do with patients that go into those facilities have multiple comorbidities. They're kind of cooped up into a single facility, and it spreads really very easily in those facilities. I mean, look at Carrollton Manor and these other, nursing homes in the community. I'm pretty sure all of them probably have positive, COVID-19 patients. They're all going to, grow and expand in those numbers, unfortunately. And so I think those fears are kind of unfounded.
Do you need that entire facility for a testing lab, and would you use that entire facility for the testing lab?
No, we wouldn't use the whole facility. Just the very upper smallest building to start. Really, just one wing of it to start with it, and that's about maybe 3,000 square feet. Long term, we were looking at starting the we wanted to name it kind of the Carver Washington Carver Center because Mr. Carver was a scientist that worked over in Tuskegee University, and he was a botanist and did a lot of plant analysis, really pushed for crop rotations and things like that. Pretty interesting story. So he was a big scientist. I'm kind of surprised that people don't want to see his legacy kind of, continued with a science-based facility. I think that would make perfect historical sense and context. The larger building, probably look at, kind of more of a business life sciences business incubator. There's also some room over there for a local kind of event center where, people could have, weddings, get-togethers, comedy clubs, that kind of thing. I know at one time I talked to Miss Gray about 10 months ago, about her wanting to have a place to put her pop-up museum regarding the Carver High and everything a couple months out of the year. All those kind of things that, the local community has talked about, they're all going to require rezoning. You can't do any of that in a multifamily residential designation of that building. So even all these things that the local community wants, you can't do without the rezoning. And so I think it's turned into one of these things where, people are fearful of change. They're fearful because we're in the middle of a pandemic. A lot of it is disinformation that's hitting the airwaves, and people, are scared of disinformation that's been spread. And then it gets into this political argument. In addition to it, okay, we don't want anything changed with our neighborhood. And, that is probably one of the legitimate concerns and legitimate arguments that I've heard, that, okay, I don't want anything new over there. I want it to sit exactly how it is now. I don't want a business in there. I don't want anything in there. I just want the building to sit and rot and, to grow up and be just like it's always been. Well, okay, that is a legitimate argument to make, but from a functional standpoint, there's a lot of economic value and money and time and people's energy that went into constructing those buildings, and it's just it'd be an absolute travesty to let them rot away.
8:52, our guest is Dr. Brent Harris. What would your, I guess officially now, do you still plan to go through with this, even if rezoning is delayed until, June or July even? Are you still intending to go on with this plan?
Well, the big problem is running a level 2 CLIA high complexity laboratories. You need an MD PhD pathologist kind of level director, and we have one of those currently for 2 months until it's up and operational. I probably will not be able to start it if the city drags it out for 2 months, just because I'm going to lose my director for it. And those type of individuals are hard to come by. There's just not a lot of them floating around. There's not a lot of those individuals floating around over here in West Georgia. And so I think we're going to probably lose the capacity of opening that lab up if the city keeps dragging their feet about it.
All right, have you already invested in equipment?
Yes, because initially I was told that it shouldn't be an issue because the zoning is so similar to the one that was already there. And all the other schools in town are currently zoned office institutional, which really that one should already be zoned that. There's probably some issues because it's the oldest and it was there when they initially integrated the zoning maps, decades ago. The reason why it never got labeled that. But that being said, there's a ton of, office space right adjacent to high density residential, all along, Bankhead. There's tons of, higher density residential behind all the business, all along Dixie Street, around the hospital and medicals. I mean, from a business operation and a zoning city operation, it makes sense to rezone that property, and I think they will go through with, zoning it office institutional. It's just, a matter of time.
Got about 4 minutes.
I think we're in the middle of a. Go ahead.
I got about 4 minutes left in the program. I'm going to ask you 2 more questions. If you are able to continue with it, what about hiring? What about jobs? How many potentially?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, initially when everything starts up, it's only a handful of positions, half dozen or something. That kind of facility and that kind of business, just because molecular diagnostics and, laboratories and life sciences, those businesses can grow. And if we're successful at it, it should give a wide variety of job positions from, zero prior experience with minimal official training to very advanced degrees. So you're going to have everybody from, high school diplomas to some technical diplomas, college diplomas, to even, your PhD level training. And it's probably going to be kind of mixed up evenly between the two, probably a little bit higher towards the technical and high school level training. I mean, to start half dozen people, over 5 to 10 years, it could be, 50 to a couple hundred people. It's really hard to say.
8:55, got about 2 minutes left. I want to go back and wrap up this program, talk about U.S. Med Clinic. How many tests have you conducted over at U.S. Med Clinic? We get the numbers from Tanner every day, updated numbers, but I think a lot of people just associate that with Carroll County, don't realize that that's Carroll County and other residents of other counties that would have tested at the Tanner facilities. There's Tanner facilities in Harrelson County as well, and in Wadowee, Alabama. But as far as the U.S. Med Clinic, how many tests have you conducted? How many are you aware of that were positive?
Yeah, so I don't know the total number. At one point early on, because we mobilized the med pods early on and started doing testing, early on in the response, we had done about 1% of the total state testing capacity. I don't know where we're at now. We do. We're doing tests every single day. Let me just pull up the last 2, 4, 6, 8. So out of the last 10 tests we've done, the 10 tests that have resulted in, we have 4 positive patients.
And so, what do you tell those patients at that point? Do they check into Tanner? Who decides that, whether they need to go into hospital at that point?
No, we clinically monitor them and keep an eye on them. We have been prescribing the Plaquenil to outpatient like early in the course. It seems like it helps. Who knows if it really does or not. A lot of these patients could be getting better no matter what. I think there's just not a lot of good data on a lot of the results. As patients get more severe, we've had a couple come back a couple days later, and we've sent them into the hospital. So usually that hospitalization requirement is, low oxygenation, being very winded, those kind of things where it's really affecting their lungs. What we wanted to do over at the new laboratory is actually work on convalescent plasma therapy. So you take out some blood, some serum of somebody that has recovered, and they have antibodies against the COVID-19, and then you type and cross-match them to a patient in the hospital, and then you can deliver that to them. Other people are doing it right now, the Red Cross and different blood banks. I just worry that I don't think, little old Carrollton in the West Georgia area is going to be probably pretty late, because I think all the metro areas are going to suck all that up going forward.
All right, Dr. Brent Harris, our guest on this morning's Community Voice program. And Dr. Harris, I appreciate you giving us a whole half hour this morning. And keep us updated, and we'll, of course, monitor that potential project with the city as well. But again, thank you for talking with us this morning. And I did encourage Brent to revisit our Facebook page later on this morning, because we'll post this interview in its entirety up there. And if you do have questions that maybe we didn't get to touch on this morning, perhaps you'll have the opportunity to review those and answer those for you, again, on the News Talk 1330 WLBB Facebook page. Also, this entire interview will be posted on our website at newstalk1330.com, hopefully in the next 5 minutes or so, an audio version. So if you just need to go back and listen to it, you'll feel free to do so. Time right now is 8:58. Stay tuned for national headlines. We'll have local news at 9:02, and then Glenn Beck is on the air until 12 o'clock here on News Talk 1330 FM 106.3. Have a great Monday.
At Tanner, our heroes are fighting the COVID-19 virus around the clock. But you have an important job too, and it's urgent. Stay home.
We all must work together to stop the spread of the COVID-19 virus.
Staying home is the only way to avoid exposing your loved ones to this virus.
Each time you leave your home, you risk exposing yourself and spreading the virus to others in our community and in your home.
Do your part so we can continue to do ours. Stay home.
It can save the life of someone you love.
As we journey through this global pandemic together, Oak Mountain Academy is lifting everyone in prayer and holding the community in our hearts. We continue to pray for all of the families directly impacted and the first responders and medical personnel on the front lines. There are so many individuals working around the clock to keep us safe and healthy. I'm Patrick Uran, headmaster, asking you to join all of us on the mountain in prayer and gratitude for everyone in our community. For more information about the Academy, visit us at oakmountain.us.
National headlines and the local stories you care about. WLBB, Carrollton, News Talk 1330, FM 106.3.